They called her the gold digger of the century. When Victoria James walked out of that Manhattan courthouse, stripped of her dignity, her custody rights, and her reputation, the world laughed. They thought she was just another trophy wife, crushed by her billionaire husband's empire. But they didn't see what was in the envelope she clutched in her trembling hand. They didn't know that her silence wasn't surrender. It was a countdown. Because Victoria wasn't hiding from the truth, she was protecting the world from it. Until now. This is the story of how one woman's silence broke a dynasty. The gavel didn't bang. That's a movie cliché. In the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the Southern District of New York Family Court, the end of Victoria James's life as she knew it came with a soft, dismissive shuffle of papers. Judgment is awarded in favor of the petitioner, Mr. James, Judge Harrington said, his voice bored, barely looking up from his bench. The prenuptial agreement is upheld in its entirety. Custody of the minor, Leo James, is granted primarily to the father, with supervised visitation rights for the mother to be determined pending psychiatric evaluation. Victoria sat frozen. The wood of the defendant's table felt greasy under her fingertips. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that she had bought 4 years ago, before the private jets, before the Hamptons estate, before the fear set in. It was the only thing she owned that Tracy hadn't paid for, and today it felt like armor made of paper. To her left, Tracy James, the man Forbes had just named the architect of the new economy, leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile. Tracy never smiled when he won. He only relaxed, like a predator that had finished a meal. He adjusted his platinum cufflinks, the ones she had given him for their 5th anniversary, and whispered something to his lead counsel, a shark named Arthur Penhaligon, who charged $2,500 an hour to destroy lives. Ms. Hall, the judge addressed her, using her maiden name. It stung more than she expected. Do you understand the terms of this ruling? Victoria looked up. Her eyes, usually a vibrant hazel, were dull, rimmed with the red exhaustion of 3 months of sleepless nights. She looked at Tracy. He was staring straight ahead, his profile sharp and handsome, the face that graced the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The $1 Trillion Man." If she spoke now, if she screamed the truth about what was buried in the foundation of James dynamics, this courtroom would turn into a crime scene. But she looked at the photo of 6-year-old Leo that sat on the edge of her table. "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered. "Speak up," Judge Harrington snapped. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. "I understand." Tracy stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge the woman who had nursed him through his panic attacks in the early days, who had edited his speeches, who had lied to the SEC investigators 3 years ago to save his skin. He simply turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. The courtroom erupted as the press was allowed back in. Victoria felt a hand on her shoulder. It was her court-appointed lawyer, a weary woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had been outmatched from day one. "I'm sorry, Victoria. We can try to appeal the visitation, but with the psychiatric evaluation order, it's going to be uphill." "It doesn't matter, Sarah," Victoria said, gathering her purse. "He won. That's what he needed." "He destroyed you," Sarah said, her voice dropping. "Why didn't you let me use the financial records you mentioned? The Cayman accounts?" Victoria turned to her lawyer, her expression unreadable. "Because, Sarah, if I used those, I wouldn't just lose custody. I'd lose my life." The walk of shame. Walking out of the courthouse was a gauntlet. The NYPD had set up barricades, but the paparazzi were feral. Flashbulbs popped like strobes in a nightmare. "Victoria, how does it feel to walk away with nothing?" Did you really cheat on him with the pool boy? Tracy says you're unstable. Comment? The narrative had been crafted masterfully. For 6 months, Tracy's PR team had planted stories in the New York Post and the Daily Mail. They painted Victoria as a hysterical, pill-popping socialite who was jealous of her husband's success. They leaked edited videos of her shouting at staff, videos taken on days when she had discovered Tracy's meetings were actually liaisons with high-end escorts or illicit dealings with sanctioned foreign entities. But the context was gone. Only the anger remained. She kept her head down, clutching her bag to her chest. She saw a familiar face in the crowd. Anderson Cooper's crew was there. This wasn't just celebrity gossip. This was a business story. Tracy James was about to launch Project Ether, a satellite network that would revolutionize global internet. A messy divorce could have tanked the stock, but a divorce where the wife is proven crazy? That makes the stock soar. The market loves a strong man who cuts off dead weight. She finally reached the curb where a generic Uber waited. No more town cars. As she fumbled for the handle, a man in a dark grey suit stepped out from behind a pillar. It was Thomas, Tracy's head of security. He had been a Navy SEAL. He used to drive Leo to school. Mrs. James, Thomas said. He was the only one who still used her married name. It's Miss Hall now, Thomas, she said, her hand on the car door. Thomas stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to be intimidating, but not enough to look aggressive to the cameras. He pressed a small, heavy object into her hand. It was a burner phone. Mr. James wanted you to have this, Thomas murmured. He says, don't go to the press. Don't go to the publishers. If you disappear quietly, the monthly stipend stays. If you make a noise, the visitation rights go away forever. Victoria looked at the phone, then at Thomas. Tell him I received the message. Take care of yourself, Victoria, Thomas said, and for a split second, she saw a flicker of pity in his eyes. He knew. He knew where the bodies were buried, but he had a mortgage and 3 kids in Jersey. He wasn't going to save her. The empty apartment, Victoria's new home, was a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, a far cry from the penthouse on 57th Street. The radiator clanked, and the view was a brick wall. She sat on the edge of the second-hand mattress and opened the envelope she had been clutching in court. It wasn't legal documents. It was a photograph. It was grainy, taken roughly 20 years ago. It showed a group of 4 young men standing in front of a garage in Palo Alto. 3 of them were smiling, holding beer bottles. One was Tracy, looking young and hungry. One was David Solomon, the co-founder, who had died in a car accident 10 years ago. One was a man Victoria didn't recognize. And the fourth man was the one who terrified her. He was the reason she had lost the case. He was the reason she had stayed silent when the judge called her unfit. Tracy had whispered it to her the night before the trial began. He had cornered her in the kitchen of their summer house, trapping her against the marble island. You can tell them about the money, Vic, he had sneered, smelling of scotch and expensive cologne. You can tell them about the fraud. But if you do, I'll tell them who you really are. I'll tell them about your father, and I'll tell them what actually happened in that garage. She looked at the photo now, tears finally spilling over. The world thought Tracy James was a genius inventor, a self-made god. But Victoria knew the truth. Tracy James hadn't invented the code that made him a billionaire. He had stolen it. And the man he stole it from, the 4th man in the photo, was currently rotting in a federal prison for a murder he didn't commit. A murder Tracy had orchestrated. Victoria wiped her eyes. The court had taken her son. They had taken her name. They thought they had broken her. But Tracy had made a fatal error. He thought Victoria was silent because she was afraid of him. She wasn't. She was silent because she needed time. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small encrypted hard drive, the one item she had managed to smuggle out of the penthouse inside a hollowed-out lipstick tube. She plugged it into her battered laptop. The screen flickered to life. Folder. Name. Project origin. "You want silence, Tracy?" She whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you silence. The calm before the storm." She opened her email client. She didn't type a message to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They were too connected to Tracy's advertising dollars. They would kill the story before it ran. Instead, she typed a single address. Recipient, Ghostwriter, 1989 on protonmail.com. Subject, the James job body. "I have the proof, I have the source code, and I know where David is really buried. I'm ready to talk." She hit send. 3 miles away, in a glass tower overlooking the park, Tracy James was toasting with champagne. His lawyer, Arthur, clinked his glass. "To freedom," Arthur said. "To silence," Tracy corrected, taking a sip. He had no idea that the woman he had just discarded wasn't a loose end. She was the match, and he had just soaked his entire empire in gasoline. The meeting was set for a place Tracy James wouldn't be caught dead in, a 24-hour laundromat in Hell's Kitchen at 3 a.m. The neon sign buzzed with an irritating hum, flickering between open and op-en. Victoria sat on a plastic orange chair, pretending to read a 3-year-old copy of Good Housekeeping. Her laundry tumbled in the dryer. Clothes she didn't really need to wash, but the rhythm was soothing. It masked the pounding of her heart. At 3:04 a.m. the door chimed. A man walked in. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a ruin. He wore a faded army jacket, had graying stubble, and carried a backpack that looked heavy enough to contain bricks. This was Elias Cross. 10 years ago, Elias had been a Pulitzer-winning investigative journalist for the Washington Post. Then he wrote an exposé on a pharmaceutical giant that Tracy James had heavily invested in. The story was killed, Elias was sued into oblivion for libel, and his reputation was shredded. He had been living off the grid ever since, a ghost in the system he used to report on. He didn't say hello. He walked to the vending machine, bought a stale coffee, and sat 2 chairs away from her, facing the opposite direction. "You look expensive," Elias muttered, his voice gravelly. "Even in Queens." "I'm not expensive anymore, Elias. I'm bankrupt," Victoria replied, not looking at him. She stared at her spinning clothes. "Did you get the files?" "I got them. Encrypted to hell and back, but I cracked the header." Elias took a sip of the coffee and grimaced. "If what's on that drive is real, Tracy James isn't just a fraud. He's a war criminal." Victoria closed her eyes. "It's the algorithm, isn't it?" "Project Ether," Elias said, the name tasting like poison. "The world thinks it's a satellite network for global internet, high-speed Wi-Fi for rural Africa and the Amazon, a humanitarian gift." "That's the cover," Victoria whispered. "The code on your drive." Elias leaned closer, though he still didn't look at her. "It's a predictive behavior model. It doesn't just provide internet. It scrapes data. Every keystroke, every voice command, every biometric reading. It feeds it into a processing core that predicts civil unrest, stock market crashes, and election results before they happen. Tracy isn't building a network. He's building a crystal ball. And he's selling the subscriptions to dictators and hedge funds?" Victoria nodded. "I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad." "How did you get this?" Elias asked. "Tracy James wipes his servers every 24 hours. His cybersecurity makes the Pentagon look like a public library." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out the photo, the one of the 4 men. She slid it across the empty seats between them. "You know Tracy," she said. "You know David Solomon, the one who died. But look at the 4th man." Elias picked up the photo. He squinted under the harsh, fluorescent light. "I don't know him." "His name is Caleb," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "Caleb Hall." Elias froze. He looked at the photo, then at Victoria. "Hall. Your maiden name." "He's my brother," Victoria confessed, the secret she had kept for 6 years finally spilling out. "Tracy didn't just steal the code from a stranger. He stole it from my brother." This was the twist that the tabloids had missed. The narrative was that Victoria was a poor girl Tracy had plucked from obscurity. The truth was darker. Tracy had been Caleb's college roommate at Stanford. Caleb was the genius, the reclusive coder who wrote the kernel of the algorithm in that garage. Tracy was the face, the charm. 6 years ago, Victoria continued, tears streaming down her face. Tracy told me Caleb had a breakdown. He said Caleb attacked him, tried to burn down the server farm. He told me he had to press charges to get Caleb help. I believed him. I married Tracy thinking he was saving my family. "And Caleb?" Elias asked softly. "Federal Supermax in Colorado," Victoria said, "serving 20 years for cyber terrorism and corporate espionage. Tracy planted the evidence. He locked my brother away to steal his mind. And when I found out, he threatened to kill him," Elias finished. "He told me that if I ever tried to leave, or if I ever spoke up, Caleb would get shanked in the yard the next day. Tracy pays the gangs inside." She turned to Elias, her eyes fierce. "I lost custody of my son, Elias. I let the world think I'm crazy. I let them take everything. But I need to get Tracy put away, not just for the fraud, but to get Caleb out, because only Caleb can unlock the full decryption key for that drive." Elias looked at the woman he had underestimated. She wasn't a socialite. She was a hostage who had just chewed through her ropes. "The drive is just the raw data," Elias said, his mind racing. "It proves the code exists, but it doesn't prove Tracy stole it. He'll claim he wrote it. He'll claim Caleb was just an assistant." "We need the original journals," Victoria said. David Solomon kept handwritten journals. He was old school. He didn't trust the cloud. "David Solomon is dead, Victoria. His estate was liquidated years ago." "Not everything," Victoria said. "Tracy thinks he burned David's personal effects. But David had a storage unit in New Jersey, listed under his mother's maiden name. I found the key in Tracy's safe 3 days before I filed for divorce." She held up a small brass key. It looked insignificant, but it was the only thing Tracy James didn't own. Elias stood up, crushing the coffee cup in his hand. A spark of life returned to his tired eyes. "If we get those journals, we can prove the timeline. We can prove Tracy stole the code before he invented it. We can exonerate your brother." "And I can get my son back," Victoria said. "Get your stuff," Elias commanded. "We're going to Jersey." "But Victoria?" "Yes?" "If Tracy finds out we have that key, he won't send lawyers this time. He'll send the cleaners." The storage facility was called You Store It, a sprawling rusting complex off the I-95 corridor, surrounded by barbed wire and weeds. It was the kind of place people put things they wanted to forget, but couldn't bring themselves to throw away. It was raining, a heavy, cold downpour that turned the asphalt into a mirror. Elias parked his battered sedan 2 blocks away. They walked the rest of the distance in silence. "Unit 404, Victoria whispered, checking the tag on the key. "Fitting." "Error not found," Elias muttered. They slipped through a gap in the fence Elias had cut with bolt cutters. The facility was a maze of orange metal doors. The only sound was the rain drumming on the tin roofs and the distant roar of the highway. When they found Unit 404, Victoria's hand trembled as she inserted the key. It turned with a stiff clack. She rolled the door up. The air that rushed out smelled of mildew and old paper. The unit was small, packed floor to ceiling with boxes, but in the center, sitting on a plastic crate, was a waterproof safe. "That's it," Victoria said, rushing forward. "Wait," Elias hissed, grabbing her arm. He pointed to the floor. A thin line of dust across the threshold had been disturbed. A faint footprint, muddy and large, was visible just inside the door. "Someone's been here," Elias said. "Recently." Victoria's blood ran cold. "Tracy?" If it was Tracy, this unit would be empty, Elias reasoned. "Someone else is looking." He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and swept the room. The boxes had been rifled through. Papers were scattered, but the safe in the center seemed untouched. "Why leave the safe?" Victoria asked. "Maybe they couldn't open it," Elias said. He approached it cautiously. "It's biometric, fingerprint scanner." Victoria stared at the scanner. "David is dead. How are we supposed to open it?" David was paranoid, Victoria recalled, a memory surfacing from a dinner party 10 years ago. He used to joke that he trusted his dog more than his partner's. He said he coded his safe to the only thing that never lied to him. "Please tell me you didn't bring a dog's paw," Elias said dryly. "No," Victoria said. "He didn't mean a literal dog. The dog was his nickname for Caleb, because Caleb was loyal." She looked at the keypad. It wasn't just biometric. There was a backup pin pad. "What's Caleb's birthday?" Elias asked. "July 14th, 1988, Victoria said. Elias punched in 071488. The light blinked red. "Try the day Caleb was arrested," Elias suggested. Victoria flinched. "November 2nd, 2018. 11:22:88. Green light. The lock clicked. Victoria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. David knew. He knew Caleb was the fall guy even back then. They swung the heavy door open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars, just 3 leather-bound notebooks and a USB drive taped to the inside of the cover. Victoria grabbed the first notebook. She flipped it open. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled. Entry, August 4th. "Tracy is pushing for the launch. He doesn't understand the anomaly in the code. If we turn it on now, the predictive engine loops. It doesn't just predict crashes, it causes them." I told him. He laughed. He said, "Chaos is a ladder, David." "I think he's going to cut me out. I saw him talking to that contractor, the one from Blackwater." "This is it," Elias said, reading over her shoulder. "This proves intent. It proves he knew the danger." Suddenly, a bright light flooded the open storage unit. "Freeze!" a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone. Victoria spun around. Through the rain, she saw headlights blinding them. 2 black SUVs had blocked the alleyway. Men in tactical gear were pouring out. "Thomas!" Victoria gasped. Tracy's head of security. "Run!" Elias shouted. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it toward the SUVs to create a distraction. He grabbed Victoria's hand and they bolted toward the back of the unit. "There's no exit!" Victoria screamed. "The wall!" Elias yelled. "The back wall is corrugated tin. It's rusted through at the bottom." Bullets pinged against the metal door frame as they scrambled over the boxes. Elias kicked the rusted panel at the back of the unit. It groaned but didn't give. "Kick it!" he roared. Victoria joined him, driving her heel into the rotting metal. With a screech of tearing steel, the panel gave way. They squeezed through the hole, tumbling out into the wet grass on the other side of the facility, right next to a drainage ditch. "They're flanking," Elias shouted, pulling her up. "Get to the car." They sprinted through the mud, slipping and sliding. Behind them, they heard the heavy boots of the security team. Thomas wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a hunter. They reached the sedan just as the first pursuer cleared the fence. Elias fumbled with the keys, dropped them, cursed, snatched them up, and jammed them into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. As he peeled out, a bullet shattered the rear windshield. Victoria screamed, ducking low, clutching the journals to her chest like a newborn baby. Elias drove like a maniac, weaving through traffic, running red lights until they were deep in the labyrinth of Brooklyn. He finally pulled into a dark alley behind a Chinese restaurant and killed the lights. For a long time, the only sound was their ragged breathing and the rain on the roof. "Are you hit?" Elias asked. Victoria checked herself, shaking but whole. "No, you?" "I'm fine." Elias looked at the rearview mirror. "That was too close. Tracy knows we have the journals now. The timeline has accelerated." "What do we do?" Victoria asked. "We can't go to the police. Thomas is ex-PD. Tracy owns half the precinct." "We don't go to the police," Elias said, pulling a laptop out of his bag. "We go to the people." "You said we needed more proof," Victoria said. "We have the journals," Elias said, tapping the leather book she was holding. "We scan these pages, we match them with the code fragments from your drive, and we release a teaser." "A teaser?" "We don't dump everything at once. Tracy will bury it with misinformation," Elias explained, his eyes glowing with the thrill of the hunt. "We leak the first chapter, David Solomon's confession about the anomaly. We make the stock market nervous. We make the investors ask questions. We force Tracy to react." Victoria looked down at the journal. "He'll come for Leo," she whispered. "If I do this, he'll hurt my son." Elias turned to her. His expression softened. "Victoria, Tracy has already taken your son. He's raising him to be just like him. If you want to save Leo, you have to break the idol he's worshipping." Victoria took a deep breath. She thought of Leo's innocent face. She thought of Caleb rotting in a cell. She thought of David Solomon, murdered for a profit margin. "Do it," she said. 6 hours later, a video appeared on YouTube, Twitter, and Reddit simultaneously. It was uploaded through a dozen proxy servers in Estonia and Singapore. The screen was black. White text appeared, typing itself out. They told you David Solomon died in a car accident. They told you Project Ether was about connection. They lied. Then, an audio clip played. It was grainy, recovered from a voice memo on David's old phone, which was found in the safe. "Tracy, you can't do this. If you switch the algorithm to active mode, it will crash the Asian markets within 48 hours. People will lose their homes. People will die." Then, Tracy's voice, smooth, arrogant, unmistakable. "People always die, David. The question is, who gets to inherit their things?" The video cut to black. A hashtag appeared. Wow's that the James Secret. Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. Within 4 hours, 1 million. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, James Dynamics stock had dropped 4%. In his penthouse, Tracy James threw his tablet across the room. It shattered against the fireplace. "Find her," he snarled at Thomas, who was standing with his head bowed. "Find my ex-wife, and bring the boy to me, immediately." "The boy is at school, sir," Thomas said. "Pull him out," Tracy ordered. "We're going to the island." Victoria had started the war, but Tracy was about to turn the battlefield into a graveyard. The world didn't crumble immediately. It wobbled. The morning after the leak, Wall Street was in a frenzy, but Tracy James was faster. At 9 a.m. sharp, he stood at a podium in the James Dynamics lobby, flanked by lawyers and, crucially, a team of digital forensic experts. He looked calm, sad even. "It breaks my heart," Tracy said into the microphones. his voice thick with rehearsed empathy. To see the mother of my child descend to this. The audio clip circulating online is a fabrication. It is a deep fake, generated by the very AI technology my company strives to protect the world against. It is a desperate act by a woman who needs help, not a platform. The experts behind him nodded. They produced charts showing digital artifacts in the audio. Fake proof manufactured overnight to discredit Victoria. The narrative shifted instantly. The hashtag The James Secret began to compete with Help Victoria. The public, confused by the technical jargon, hesitated. In the safe house, a cramped basement in Brooklyn, owned by one of Elias's old contacts, Victoria watched the broadcast on a cracked monitor. She felt sick. "He's winning," she whispered. "He turned the truth into a conspiracy theory." "He bought time," Elias corrected. He was typing furiously on 3 different laptops. "But he's scared. Look at his hands." He zoomed in on the video feed. Tracy's left hand, gripping the podium, was white-knuckled. A vein in his temple was throbbing. "He knows we have the journals," Elias said. "He knows the deepfake defense won't hold up in court if we produce the physical evidence. He's going to run." Suddenly, Victoria's phone, the burner Thomas had given her, buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from an app she had secretly installed on Leo's iPad months ago, disguised as a math game. Location alert. Leo James has left the designated geofence. Victoria tapped the map. The dot representing her son was moving fast, too fast for a car. "He's moving, Leo," she gasped. Elias pulled up the flight trackers. "James's private jet, tail number N1RS, just filed a flight plan. Titterboro to unknown." "Where is he taking him?" "He's going dark," Elias said, his face grim. "He's heading to the Spire." "The Spire?" "Tracy's private island off the coast of Nova Scotia," Victoria realized, her blood freezing. "It's a fortress. He calls it his doomsday bunker. No extradition treaties. Private security force. If he takes Leo there..." "If he takes him there, we can't touch him legally," Elias finished. "He'll sit on that island, let the lawyers drag this out for 10 years, and turn your son against you." Victoria stood up. The fear that had paralyzed her in the courtroom was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. She walked over to the table where the journals lay. "He thinks he's safe there," she said. "He thinks walls can keep me out." "Victoria," Elias warned, "that island has thermal cameras, motion sensors, and armed guards. It's suicide." "He has my son, Elias." She turned to him. "And he has something else. Look at the flight manifest again. Is he flying alone?" Elias hacked into the airport's private log. He frowned. 2 passengers. Leo James, and a John Doe transferred from federal custody under a medical emergency warrant. Victoria nodded. "Caleb. He pulled your brother out of prison?" Elias was stunned. "How?" "Money. Influence. He probably claimed Caleb has a rare condition that only specialists on his payroll can treat. He's taking them both to the island." "Why?" "Because I have the journals, but I don't have the password to the source code," Victoria said. "And neither does Tracy. Caleb locked it in his mind before he was arrested. Tracy is taking them to the island to torture the password out of my brother. And he's going to use Leo as leverage to make him talk." Victoria grabbed her coat. "I'm not filing an appeal, Elias. I'm going to Nova Scotia." The Atlantic Ocean was a churning grey beast. A small fishing trawler bobbed in the swells, 5 miles off the coast of the Spire. Victoria huddled in the cabin, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of diesel and fish. She wasn't wearing her wool coat anymore. She was dressed in black tactical gear Elias had sourced from a surplus store. "We have a problem," Elias said. coming down from the wheelhouse. The captain, a grumbling local fisherman Elias had bribed with his last $5,000, kept the boat steady. "What is it?" "The island's perimeter sensors are active. If we get within 2 miles, they'll spot us. We can't get close enough to launch the Zodiac boat." Victoria looked at the dark silhouette of the island on the horizon. A single jagged peak rose from the water, topped by a glass and steel mansion that looked like a villain's lair from a movie. "We need a distraction," Victoria said. "We need a miracle," Elias muttered. Suddenly the radio crackled. "Echo 1 to Ghost. Echo 1 to Ghost. Come in." Elias stared at the radio. "Who is that?" Victoria grabbed the mic. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that voice. "This is Ghost," she said. "Go ahead, Echo 1. "The perimeter sensors will be down for exactly 3 minutes at Oro 200 hours, the voice said. "The shift change happens then. The cameras in the East Cove will be on a loop. You have a window. Don't miss it." "Thomas," Victoria whispered. "He's going to kill them, Victoria." Thomas's voice came through, distorted by static but heavy with regret. "Tracy. He told me to prep the disposal site. I didn't sign up for killing kids. I can get you in, but I can't get you out. You're on your own once you breach the wall." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I have a son, too," Thomas said. "And because you were the only one who ever asked about him." The line went dead. Elias looked at Victoria. "Do you trust him?" "I trust a man who's afraid," Victoria said. "Thomas is terrified of what Tracy has become." At 01:55 a.m., they lowered the black inflatable Zodiac into the freezing water. The rain lashed against their faces. Elias steered the small motor, keeping it low and quiet. They cut through the waves, the dark loom of the spire growing larger. It was a terrifying structure, cliffs of jagged rock topped with a 20-foot electrified fence. "1 minute to shift change," Elias hissed, checking his watch. They aimed for the East Cove, a narrow inlet filled with sharp rocks. It was the only place the waves weren't smashing against the cliffs with lethal force. 30 seconds. They hit the sand. Victoria leaped out, dragging the boat into the shadows of a cave. Above them, a camera mounted on a steel pole swiveled. "Wait." Elias held up a hand. The camera paused. It jittered, then reset to its starting position. The loop. Thomas had done it. "Go." They scrambled up the wet rocks. Victoria moved with a determination she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't the trophy wife anymore. She was a mother tearing through hell to get her child. They reached the perimeter fence. Thomas had left a section of the grounding wire exposed. Elias used insulated cutters to snap the links. They squeezed through. They were in. The estate grounds were manicured perfection. Statues, hedges, and a massive infinity pool, all hidden from the world. But the atmosphere was heavy with dread. "Where would he keep them?" Elias whispered. "The server room," Victoria said instantly. "Under the main house. That's where the cooling systems are. That's where the heart of the beast is. If he's interrogating Caleb, he'll do it near the mainframe." They crept through the gardens, dodging patrols of guards with assault rifles. They reached the side entrance of the mansion. The door was locked. Victoria pulled out the keycard Thomas had left, taped under a designated planter, part of the arrangement. The light turned green. They slipped inside. The house was silent, a mausoleum of marble and glass. They found the elevator to the basement levels. Victoria pressed the button for sub-level 3. The elevator doors opened to a blast of cold air and the hum of massive servers. The room was bathed in blue LED light. Rows of computer banks stretched out like a digital graveyard. In the center of the room, there was a glass-walled enclosure. Inside, tied to a chair, was a man who looked like a skeleton. His hair was long and matted, his skin pale as paper. It was Caleb. and sitting on a small stool in the corner, clutching a teddy bear, was Leo. He looked terrified, his eyes wide and red. Standing over them was Tracy. He was screaming, "Give me the key, Caleb, or so help me God. The boy stays here while you go for a swim with the weights." Caleb mumbled something, his head lolling. He was drugged. Victoria didn't wait for a plan. She didn't wait for Elias. She stepped out of the elevator, raising the flare gun she had taken from the boat's emergency kit. "Tracy!" she screamed. Tracy spun around. His eyes were wild, manic. He looked at Victoria, then at the flare gun, and laughed. "Victoria, you actually came. I'm impressed." He motioned to the guard standing in the shadows. "Caesar, don't move!" Victoria aimed the flare gun, not at Tracy, but at the server racks behind him. "One shot, Tracy. One shot into the halon fire suppression system trigger, and this whole room fills with gas. The servers fry, the code dies, and you lose everything." Tracy froze. He knew the specs of his own building. The halon gas would destroy the electronics instantly to prevent a fire spreading. "You wouldn't," Tracy sneered. "You'd kill the boy." "The gas is breathable for humans for 5 minutes," Victoria bluffed. She had no idea if it was. "But your precious algorithm? It's gone in seconds." "Mummy!" Leo cried out. "It's okay, baby," Victoria said, her voice shaking but strong. "Mummy's here." Tracy's face twisted. "You think you can beat me? I own the courts. I own the news. You are nothing." "I am the witness," Victoria said. Suddenly, the monitors on the wall behind Tracy flickered. The code, the endless streams of data, stopped. A new image appeared on every screen in the room. It was the scanned page of David Solomon's journal, the page detailing the murder plot. Elias had found a terminal. He had uploaded the files directly into Tracy's internal network, bypassing the firewall from the inside. "What is this?" Tracy hissed, looking at the screens. "I didn't just come for my son," Victoria said, stepping closer. "I came to burn it down." "Thomas!" Tracy yelled into his radio. "Kill the connection! Thomas!" The radio remained silent. "Thomas isn't listening, Tracy," Victoria said. "And neither is the world. Elias just live-streamed the journal to every major news outlet. They're not looking at a deepfake anymore. They're looking at your internal server logs." Tracy's composure shattered. He pulled a handgun from his waistband and grabbed Leo, hauling the boy out of the chair. He pressed the gun to the child's head. "Back off!" Tracy screamed, saliva flying. "I'll do it. I'll take him with me." Victoria froze. The flare gun was useless now. But then a shadow moved behind Tracy. It wasn't Elias. It wasn't Thomas. It was Caleb, the broken man, the skeleton in the chair. Caleb had quietly worked his wrists free from the restraints while Tracy was distracted. He wasn't as drugged as he looked. He stood up, shaky but driven by a primal protective instinct. As Tracy cocked the hammer, Caleb lunged. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed glass room. Victoria screamed, "Leo!" But Leo hadn't been hit. Caleb, summoning a burst of desperate strength from his emaciated frame, had slammed his shoulder into Tracy just as the trigger pulled. The bullet shattered into the acoustic ceiling tiles, raining white dust down on them. Tracy stumbled, losing his grip on the boy. "You worthless junkie!" he roared, turning the gun on Caleb. Caleb, weak from years of confinement and drugs, couldn't fight back. He slumped to the floor, gasping. Tracy raised the gun for a kill shot. "No!" Victoria didn't think. She didn't calculate. She tackled Tracy. It was an absurd mismatch. Tracy was 6 feet tall, fit, and fueled by adrenaline. Victoria was exhausted and smaller, but she had the fury of a mother whose child was inches from death. She drove her shoulder into his midsection, knocking him back against the sharp metal edge of a server rack. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under the mainframe. Tracy backhanded her, a brutal blow that sent her crashing into a metal desk. "I made you!" he spat, wiping blood from his lip. "I gave you a life you didn't deserve. I bought you." He scrambled for the gun. "Hey, Tracy." Tracy looked up. Elias was standing by the main console, his hand hovering over a large red lever on the wall encased in plastic. The emergency purge. "Chaos is a ladder, right?" Elias yelled. He smashed the plastic and pulled the lever. A siren blared, an apocalyptic wail. The halon gas system didn't trigger. Elias had lied about that to stall him, but the server coolant flush did. Massive vents opened, and freezing cold liquid nitrogen vapor hissed into the room, creating an instant, blinding white fog. The temperature plummeted 40 degrees in seconds. "Leo, come to my voice!" Victoria screamed, crawling on the freezing floor. "Mummy!" She felt a small hand grab hers. She pulled him into her chest, shielding him with her body. "I've got you! I've got you! Get Caleb!" Elias shouted from the fog. Victoria grabbed Caleb's shirt collar. "Caleb, move! We have to move!" "Go!" Caleb wheezed. "Leave me! Not this time!" she grunted. She hauled her brother up, draping his arm over her shoulder. They stumbled toward the elevator. The cold was intense, biting at their skin. Tracy was somewhere in the whiteout, screaming incoherently about his stock price, about his legacy. He wasn't chasing them anymore. He was trying to save the servers, frantically pressing buttons on a frozen console, choosing his empire over his freedom. The elevator doors closed, sealing Tracy in his frozen tomb of data. They emerged into the main house to absolute chaos. The alarm had triggered a full lockdown, but the guards weren't stopping them. They were running. "Why are they running?" Victoria panted, dragging Caleb through the lobby. "Look!" Elias pointed out the massive bay windows. The night sky above the ocean wasn't dark anymore. It was lit up by flashing red and blue lights, helicopters, a swarm of them, and on the water, the shapes of Coast Guard cutters and FBI boats were closing in, their spotlights sweeping the cliffs. Thomas called them. Victoria realized, tears mixing with the sweat on her face. "He didn't just help us in, he turned state's evidence." They burst out the front doors just as the first FBI helicopter touched down on the great lawn, kicking up a storm of grass and dust. Agents in windbreakers swarmed out, weapons drawn. "Down! Get down!" Victoria dropped to her knees, holding Leo tight. Elias raised his hands. Caleb collapsed on the grass, looking up at the sky for the first time in 6 years without bars blocking the view. Behind them, the front doors banged open. Tracy James stumbled out of the mansion. He was clutching a hard drive, his suit frozen stiff with frost, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked like a ghost. "You can't touch me!" he screamed at the agents, holding the drive like a holy relic. "I am Tracy James. I own this country." 2 agents tackled him. The hard drive, the only backup of the stolen algorithm, skittered across the pavement and landed in a puddle of muddy water. As they handcuffed him, Tracy looked up. He locked eyes with Victoria. She didn't look away. She didn't tremble. She just held her son and watched the architect of the new economy get dragged away like a common criminal. The federal trial of Tracy James did not begin with a bang, but with a suffocating silence. The Southern District Courthouse, packed with journalists, legal scholars, and the merely curious, felt less like a hall of justice and more like a gladiatorial arena where a king was about to be fed to the lions. Tracy entered the room, not in his signature bespoke Italian suit, but in standard-issue federal orange. The transformation was jarring. Without the expensive tailoring, the bronzed tan, and the aura of invincibility that wealth provides, he looked ordinary. He looked small. His eyes, usually scanning the room for leverage, were fixed on the floor. Victoria sat in the front row of the gallery, her spine rigid against the wooden bench. To her right sat Elias Cross, now clean-shaven and wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, a man uncomfortable with respectability, but wearing it for her. To her left was Caleb. Caleb was the miracle. 6 months of intense physical therapy and medical treatment had put weight back on his frame, though he still walked with a cane, a permanent reminder of the damp, cold cell in the spire. He wore a simple button-down shirt. He refused to look at Tracy. He stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, his hands folded tightly in his lap, trembling slightly. The prosecution's case was a sledgehammer. Over 3 weeks, they dismantled the myth of the $1 trillion man, piece by piece. They played the audio tapes from David Solomon's journals. The courtroom listened in horrified stillness as Tracy's voice, cool and detached, discussed the necessary liquidation of his partner. They brought out the forensic accountants who traced the shell companies Tracy had used to bribe the prison warden to release Caleb into his custody, a transaction listed in the ledger as asset relocation biological. But the turning point, the moment the air left the room, was when Victoria took the stand. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who seemed to know he was fighting a losing battle, tried to paint her as a bitter ex-wife. "Ms. Hall," he said, using her maiden name with a sneer, "isn't it true that you violated a court order to enter Mr. James's property? Isn't it true you endangered your son by bringing him into a volatile situation?" Victoria leaned into the microphone. Her voice didn't waver. "I didn't bring my son into a volatile situation. I pulled him out of the fire his father lit." She looked directly at Tracy, locking eyes with the man who had tormented her. "I broke the law to save a life. Tracy broke the law to end them." When she stepped down, the jury refused to make eye contact with the defendant. The deliberation took less than 4 hours. When the jury returned, the foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher from the Bronx, stood up. Her hands were steady. "On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant, Tracy James, guilty. On the count of kidnapping, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty." The word guilty rang out 24 times. Judge van der Hoven, a woman known for her icy demeanor, looked over her spectacles at Tracy. "Mr. James," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, "you built a castle on a foundation of bones. You treated human beings like lines of code, deletable, editable, owned. This court sentences you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, all assets of James Dynamics are to be seized and placed into a restitution fund for the victims of your predictive market manipulation." Tracy didn't scream. He didn't lunge at the bench. He simply slumped. The arrogance, the genius, the God complex. It all evaporated, leaving behind a lonely, aging man who realized, finally, that he couldn't buy his way out of this room. As the marshals hauled him up, he cast one last desperate look at the gallery. He looked for Victoria, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her brother, who was quietly weeping, his head bowed in relief. The chains were finally broken. Walking out of the courthouse was a mirror image of the day she lost custody. Yet everything had changed. The crowd was massive, but the hostility was gone. There were signs. "We believe Victoria and justice for Caleb." Reporters shouted questions, but they weren't about her clothes or her dating life. "Ms. Hall, how does it feel to expose the biggest fraud in tech history?" "Caleb, will you reclaim the rights to the algorithm?" Victoria stopped at the bottom of the steps. The winter sun was crisp and bright. She raised a hand, and the shouting died down. "We aren't here to celebrate," she said, her voice amplified by a dozen microphones. "We are here to remember David Solomon. We are here to remember that the truth is fragile. Tracy James thought he could rewrite reality because he had the money to buy the ink. He was wrong. She turned to Caleb. "This belongs to you," she whispered. Caleb stepped forward. He looked at the cameras, blinking against the flashbulbs. "I don't want the algorithm," he said softly. "The code, it's too dangerous. I'm destroying the source key. Project Ether dies today." A gasp went through the crowd. Billions of dollars deleted. But Victoria squeezed his hand. It was the right choice. Some things were too powerful for anyone to own. 3 months later, spring had come to New York. Victoria sat on a bench in Central Park. Leo was chasing a golden retriever across the grass, a dog they had adopted and named Dave in honor of the friend who saved them from beyond the grave. Elias sat next to her, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He was no longer the paranoid recluse living in the shadows. He was the editor-in-chief of the Solomon Project, a non-profit investigative journalism outlet funded by the restitution money Victoria had been awarded. "You know," Elias said, watching Leo laugh as the dog licked his face, "they're making a movie. Hollywood. They want to know who should play you." Victoria laughed, a sound that felt foreign but wonderful in her throat. "Tell them to cast someone tired. I'm exhausted." "You don't look tired," Elias said, turning to her. "You look free." She looked at her son. Leo wasn't the terrified boy clutching a teddy bear in a freezing server room anymore. He was just a kid. He had his childhood back. "I am," Victoria smiled. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a text from Caleb. He was in Vermont, living in a cabin, writing code for open-source educational software. Text: "The stars are clear up here, Vic." "Thank you." Victoria put the phone away. She stood up and brushed the pollen from her dress. No longer the gold digger. No longer the victim. She was Victoria Hall. She had walked through the fire, burned down the castle, and brought her family out the other side. "Come on, Leo," she called out, opening her arms. "Let's go home." Leo ran into her arms, breathless and happy. As she held him, she looked at the skyline of the city, a city of secrets and giants. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. She knew now that even the tallest towers could fall, provided you hit them with the hardest thing on earth: the truth. The nightmare was over. The story was hers to write now. Victoria Hall lost everything to find the one thing money couldn't buy: the truth. She took on a titan and won, not with billions of dollars, but with courage and the unbreakable bond of a mother's love. Her story reminds us that no matter how powerful the lie, the truth is always worth fighting for. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It really helps us share more real-life dramas like this. Do you think justice was served, or did Tracy get off too easy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that shakes the world. Thanks for watching.